Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag, the familiar smell of motor oil and metal filling his small repair shop. The ancient electric fans struggled against the humid afternoon heat, barely moving the thick air that hung over New Angeles like a blanket. Outside, the sounds of the city continued their endless symphony. Hover cars humming past, construction mechs hammering away at another skyscraper, and the distant rumble of cargo ships heading to the spaceport. He had inherited this little shop from his grandfather, who had inherited it from his grandfather before him. 3 generations of humans fixing things that other people had given up on. It wasn't glamorous work, especially not in a world where most people just threw broken things away and bought new ones. But Marcus found peace in the rhythm of diagnosis, disassembly, and repair. Every broken machine had a story, and he was good at listening. The bell above his door chimed, its brass surface worn smooth by decades of use. Marcus looked up from the hoverbike engine he was rebuilding to see a young woman standing in his doorway. She was tall and lean, with pale skin that seemed to have never seen much sunlight. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore clothes that were expensive, but trying hard not to look it. Designer jeans with carefully placed wear marks, a t-shirt that probably cost more than Marcus made in a week, but looked like something from a thrift store. What caught his attention, though, was the way she moved. There was something careful about her steps, as if she was thinking about each one. And her eyes, they were a striking violet color that seemed to take in everything at once, cataloging details like a scanner. "Are you the owner?" she asked, her voice carrying just the hint of an accent he couldn't place. "That's me, Marcus Chen." He set down his wrench and walked over, noting how she stood slightly closer to the door than most customers did. Ready to run, maybe. "What can I do for you?" She glanced around the shop, taking in the organized chaos of parts bins, half-assembled machines, and tools that had been used so much they'd worn smooth. "I have a bike. It's broken." "Most people do when they come here," Marcus said with a grin. "What kind of bike?" "It's outside." Marcus followed her out into the street, where an old model electric bicycle was propped against his shop window. It was a beautiful machine, probably worth more than his entire month's rent, but it had seen better days. The frame was scratched, the battery housing was cracked, and one of the wheels sat at an odd angle. "What happened to it?" he asked, running his hands along the frame. "I crashed," she said simply. "Into a wall." Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't press. People crashed bikes for all kinds of reasons, and most of them were none of his business. "Well, the good news is that nothing looks bent beyond repair. The bad news is that this is going to take some time. The battery housing is custom work, and I'll need to fabricate a new mounting bracket for the front wheel. You're looking at maybe a week." She was quiet for a long moment, chewing on her lower lip. "How much?" Marcus did some quick calculations in his head. The parts alone would cost him a couple $100, and the labor would take at least 20 hours. He was about to quote her his usual rate when he noticed something. She was standing differently now, her shoulders slightly hunched, her hands clasped in front of her like she was bracing for bad news. "400, he said, cutting his estimate in half. Her eyes widened slightly. "That's all?" "It's a fair price," Marcus said, though his business sense was screaming at him. "I can tell you've taken good care of this bike. It deserves to be fixed right." She was staring at him now, those violet eyes searching his face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Most people would charge more, especially for someone like me." "Someone like you?" "Someone who obviously has money." Marcus shrugged. "Money doesn't make the work any harder. Besides, I like this bike. Reminds me of one my grandfather had." For the first time since she'd walked into his shop, she smiled. It transformed her entire face, chasing away the careful guardedness and revealing something warm and genuine underneath. "I'm Zara," she said, extending her hand. "Marcus." Her handshake was firm with calluses that spoke of work with tools. Interesting. When can you start? Right now, if you want. I've got the time. She hesitated again. Actually, could I watch? I've never seen anyone work on bikes before. Most customers preferred to drop off their machines and forget about them until they were fixed. But there was something in her voice, a genuine curiosity that reminded Marcus of himself when he was young, and his grandfather was teaching him the trade. Sure, he said. Just don't touch anything without asking. They spent the next 3 hours in his shop as Marcus carefully disassembled the bike. Zara perched on a stool beside his workbench, asking questions about everything. Why did he remove that bolt before that one? How did he know which parts could be salvaged and which needed to be replaced? What did that tool do? Her questions were intelligent, showing a technical mind that understood systems and engineering. But there was something else, too. The way she watched him work, the careful attention she paid to his explanations, it was like she was studying him as much as the repair process. "You're very patient," she said, as Marcus explained the difference between two nearly identical screws. "Patience is half the job," he replied. "You can't rush good work. Things break when people try to take shortcuts. Is that why you still do this? When most people just replace things instead of fixing them?" Marcus paused, a half-disassembled brake caliper in his hands. It was a good question, one he'd been asked before by friends who couldn't understand why he didn't just get a job at one of the big tech companies. "I guess I don't like waste," he said finally. "Every machine has value, you know? Just because something's broken doesn't mean it's worthless. Usually, it just needs someone to care enough to figure out what went wrong." Zara was quiet for a long moment. That's a very human way to look at things. Something in her tone made Marcus glance up. There was an odd expression on her face, like she'd said more than she meant to. As opposed to what? "Oh, nothing, just... Where I come from, people tend to throw things away pretty quickly." Marcus went back to his work, but he filed that comment away. Where she came from. Her accent, the careful way she moved, the expensive clothes trying to look casual, there was definitely a story there. As the afternoon wore on, Zara began to relax. She laughed at Marcus's stories about some of the stranger repair jobs he'd taken on. She even helped hand him tools, her movements becoming more natural as she forgot to be quite so careful. "So you've never wanted to leave Earth?" she asked, as Marcus started cleaning the bike's chain. "Leave Earth?" Marcus looked up, surprised. "Where would I go?" "I don't know. Mars? The Jupiter stations? There's supposed to be good work out there for people with technical skills." "Maybe," Marcus said, "but this is home. My family's been here for generations. Besides, there's something to be said for staying in one place long enough to really understand it. Even if that place doesn't always appreciate what you do." Marcus considered this. It was true that repair work wasn't exactly valued in a society that prized the new and disposable, but there were rewards that went beyond money or status. "I had a customer once," he said, "brought me a music player that had belonged to her grandmother. Thing was ancient, probably 50 years old. She'd been told by 3 other places that it couldn't be fixed. But I spent 2 weeks on it, tracking down parts, rebuilding circuits. When I finally got it working and played her grandmother's favorite song," Marcus smiled at the memory, "she cried, right here in the shop. Said it was like getting a piece of her family back." Zara was watching him intently. "That must have felt good. Better than good. It felt important." Marcus set down his tools and looked at her. "I think people need to know that things can be fixed. That just because something's broken doesn't mean it's the end of the story." The shop fell quiet, except for the hum of the fans and the distant sounds of the city. Zara was staring down at her hands, her expression thoughtful. "What about people? she asked suddenly. Do you think people can be fixed, too? It was an odd question, spoken so quietly, Marcus almost missed it. But there was something in her voice, a vulnerability that made him choose his words carefully. I think people are a lot more complicated than machines, he said. But yeah, I think most problems have solutions. Just takes the right person with the right tools and enough patience to figure it out. Zara looked up at him then, those violet eyes bright and intense. Even if the problem is really big? Like, bigger than just one person? Especially then, Marcus said. Big problems just mean you need more people working on them. And sometimes you need someone from the outside, someone who sees things differently. A loud crash from the street outside interrupted their conversation. Marcus looked out the window to see a delivery truck trying to navigate around a hover car that had broken down in the middle of the intersection. The hover car's driver was standing beside his vehicle, looking helpless as traffic began to back up behind him. Excuse me for a minute, Marcus said, grabbing a toolkit. Can't stand to watch someone struggle with a broken machine. He jogged outside, Zara following behind him. The hover car was a mid-range model, probably 5 years old. Marcus could hear the problem before he even opened the hood. A grinding sound that meant the primary lift generator was failing. What's wrong with it? The driver asked. He was a middle-aged man in a business suit, sweat already beginning to show through his shirt. Lift generator's going bad, Marcus said, popping the hood. Probably just needs the stabilizer coils realigned. You got jumper cables? The man shook his head. I don't even know what those are. Marcus sighed. This was the problem with modern technology. It worked so well most of the time that people never learned how to fix it when it didn't. He jogged back to his shop and returned with a portable power pack and some basic tools. It took him 15 minutes to diagnose and fix the problem. The stabilizer coils had indeed shifted out of alignment, probably due to a hard landing or aggressive maneuvering. A simple adjustment was all it needed. How much do I owe you? The driver asked as his car hummed back to life. Nothing, Marcus said, packing up his tools. Just remember to get those coils checked every few months. They tend to drift on this model. The man tried to insist on paying something, but Marcus waved him off. By the time the traffic had cleared and he'd made it back to his shop, Zara was sitting exactly where he'd left her, but her expression had changed completely. You didn't charge him, she said. Didn't seem right to. 5-minute fix, and the guy was obviously having a bad day already. But you could have. He would have paid whatever you asked. Marcus shrugged. Could have, sure. But just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Zara was staring at him with that same intense look she'd had earlier, like she was trying to solve a particularly difficult puzzle. You really believe that, don't you? That helping people is more important than making money? I believe that making money by helping people is the best way to do both, Marcus said. But if I had to choose... He gestured toward the street where the hover car had disappeared into traffic. Well, you saw what I chose. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly. Marcus made good progress on the bike, and Zara continued to ask questions and help where she could. As closing time approached, she seemed reluctant to leave. I should go, she said, but she didn't get up from her stool. Where are you staying? Marcus asked. I can call you a cab if you need one. I'm between places right now, she said carefully. I'll figure something out. Marcus paused in his cleanup. Between places usually meant homeless, but Zara's clothes and general appearance suggested otherwise. Still, he'd learned not to make assumptions about people's situations. There's a decent hotel about 6 blocks from here, he offered. Clean, reasonable rates. I can point you in the right direction. Thank you, she said, and meant it. What time should I come back tomorrow? I open at 8, but you don't need to be here that early. The bike won't be ready for a few days. I know, but I'd like to watch, if that's okay. I'm learning a lot. Marcus smiled. Sure. I'll see you tomorrow, Zara. After she left, Marcus finished cleaning up and locked the shop. As he walked to his small apartment above a noodle shop 3 blocks away, he found himself thinking about his unusual customer. There was definitely more to Zara's story than she was telling him. The expensive clothes, the careful way she spoke, the technical knowledge that didn't quite match her claimed inexperience with bikes, it all added up to someone who wasn't quite who they appeared to be. But then, everyone had secrets, and as long as she wasn't planning to rob him or anything, Marcus was content to let her keep hers. He'd always been better at fixing machines than understanding people anyway. What he couldn't shake, though, was the feeling that this repair job was going to be about more than just fixing a bike. There had been something in Zara's voice when she asked about fixing people, something that suggested she had a very big problem indeed. Marcus fell asleep that night thinking about purple eyes and unanswered questions, not knowing that his simple act of kindness had just changed the course of galactic history. Zara arrived at exactly 8 the next morning, carrying coffee and pastries from the bakery down the street. Marcus was already elbow-deep in her bike's motor housing, but he looked up with surprise when she walked in. "You didn't have to bring breakfast," he said, though he accepted the coffee gratefully. "It's the least I could do. You're letting me learn from watching you work." She settled onto her stool and unwrapped a Danish. "How long have you been here?" "About an hour. I like the quiet in the morning." Marcus took a sip of the coffee and raised his eyebrows. "This is really good. Where did you get it?" "There's a little place called Rosa's about 4 blocks away. The owner is from Mars Colony 7. She knows how to make real coffee, not the synthetic stuff." Marcus paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Mars Colony 7? How do you know where she's from?" Zara's face went carefully blank for just a moment before she shrugged. "I asked. I like talking to people from different places." It was a reasonable answer, but something about the way she said it made Marcus file it away with all the other small oddities he'd noticed about her. Still, the coffee was excellent, and the pastries were fresh and warm. "So what are you working on today?" Zara asked, changing the subject smoothly. Marcus showed her the motor housing, pointing out the hairline crack that was causing the power fluctuations. "I need to weld this, but the alloy is tricky. Too much heat and the whole housing warps. Too little and the weld won't hold." "What kind of alloy?" "Titanium vanadium composite. Pretty standard for high-end bikes, but each manufacturer has their own blend. I had to do some research to figure out the exact specifications for this one." Zara leaned forward, studying the crack with intense interest. "Research where?" "Technical databases, mostly. Your bike's manufacturer went out of business about 3 years ago, so I had to dig through archived specs." Marcus fired up his welding torch and adjusted the flame. "This is going to be the tricky part. Mind standing back a bit?" As Marcus worked, Zara asked more questions about the welding process, the properties of different metals, and the engineering principles behind electric bike design. Her questions were increasingly sophisticated, showing a depth of technical knowledge that seemed far beyond casual curiosity. "You seem to know a lot about engineering for someone who's never worked on bikes," Marcus observed as he let the weld cool. "I read a lot," Zara said quickly, "and I've always been interested in how things work." Marcus nodded, but he was beginning to suspect that reading wasn't the whole story. The way she examined the weld, the casual familiarity with which she discussed metallurgy, the precise way she asked about tolerances and specifications, it all suggested hands-on experience. Around noon, they were interrupted by the arrival of another customer. Mrs. Patterson from down the street bustled in, carrying an ancient-looking food processor. "Marcus, dear, I hope you can help me," she said, setting the machine down on his counter. "This old thing finally gave up the ghost, and they don't make parts for it anymore." Marcus examined the food processor, which looked like it was at least 20 years old. The motor was seized, and several of the internal gears were worn down to nubs. "Mrs. Patterson, I hate to say it, but this one might be beyond saving. The motor's completely burned out, and I don't think I can find replacement gears." The elderly woman's face fell. "Oh, that's such a shame. My late husband gave me that for our anniversary 15 years ago. I know it's silly, but—" "It's not silly," Marcus said gently. "Let me take a closer look, see what I can do." As Marcus disassembled the food processor, Zara watched Mrs. Patterson with an expression of deep concentration. The older woman was telling Marcus about her husband, how he'd saved up for months to buy the processor, how she'd used it to make his favorite soup every week until he passed away last year. "The soup just doesn't taste the same when I make it by hand," Mrs. Patterson said sadly. "I know it's the same recipe, but somehow—" "It's not the same," Zara said suddenly. Both Marcus and Mrs. Patterson looked at her in surprise. "When something has emotional significance, the physical process of using it becomes part of the memory. Changing that process changes how we experience the memory." Mrs. Patterson nodded eagerly. "Exactly. You understand?" Marcus looked at Zara with new interest. That was a remarkably insightful observation, showing an understanding of human psychology that seemed to go beyond her years. "Marcus," Zara said, leaning over to examine the food processor, "what if you could machine new gears? The design isn't that complex. I don't have the equipment for that kind of precision work, and even if I did, it would cost more than the machine is worth." "But what if cost wasn't an issue?" Zara's eyes were bright with what looked like excitement. "Hypothetically." Marcus considered this. "Well, hypothetically, I could probably recreate the gears using a 3D printer and some high-strength polymer, and I might be able to rebuild the motor using parts from a similar model. It would take a while, though." "How long?" "Maybe a week, but, Mrs. Patterson, I have to warn you, the cost would be—" "What if I covered the cost?" Zara interrupted. "As a learning experience, you could show me how to do the gear fabrication, and I'll pay for the materials and your time." Mrs. Patterson looked back and forth between them, confused but hopeful. Marcus was equally confused, but for different reasons. The materials alone would cost at least $500, and his time would double that. "Zara, that's very generous, but—" "Please," she said, and there was something almost desperate in her voice. "I want to learn how to fix things properly, complex things, and I want Mrs. Patterson to have her soup." Marcus studied her face, trying to understand what was really going on. This wasn't just about learning or even about kindness. There was something else driving her. Something that made this broken food processor intensely important. "All right," he said finally. "But you're really going to learn. I'm not doing the work while you watch. You're going to get your hands dirty." "I'd like that," Zara said, and her smile was radiant. Mrs. Patterson left the food processor with tears in her eyes, promising to bake them both cookies when it was fixed. As soon as she was gone, Marcus turned to Zara. "Okay, what's really going on here? That was at least a $1,000 repair job you just signed up for." Zara was quiet for a long moment, standing by the window and watching the street outside. "Do you think Mrs. Patterson is a good person?" "Of course. She's been nothing but kind to me since I opened this shop. And she deserves to have her soup, doesn't she? To have that connection to her husband's memory?" "Yes, but then why does it matter how much it costs?" Zara turned to face him, and there was an intensity in her expression that was almost overwhelming. "You said yesterday that helping people was more important than making money. Did you mean that?" Marcus felt like he was being tested, though he couldn't understand why or by whom. "Yes, I meant it. But there's a difference between helping someone and throwing money at a problem." "Is there, if the end result is the same?" The process matters, Marcus said firmly. Mrs. Patterson doesn't need charity. She needs to know that someone cared enough to put in the effort to fix something important to her. Zara's expression softened. And you'll put in that effort whether I pay for it or not, won't you? Marcus realized he'd been trapped in his own logic. Yes, he admitted, I would. Then let me pay for the materials. Consider it an investment in my education. They spent the rest of the day working on Zara's bike and planning the food processor repair. Marcus showed her how to use his 3D modeling software to recreate the broken gears, and he was amazed at how quickly she picked it up. Within a few hours, she was manipulating complex 3D models like she'd been doing it for years. "You're sure you've never done this before?" he asked, as she fine-tuned the specifications for the main drive gear. "I'm a fast learner," she said, not looking up from the screen. That evening, as they cleaned up the shop, Marcus found himself watching Zara more carefully, the way she organized tools. The casual familiarity with which she handled complex equipment, the depth of her technical questions, it all pointed to someone with extensive engineering experience. "Zara," he said as they prepared to leave, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What do you really do? For work, I mean." She was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she might not answer. Finally, she said, "I'm between jobs right now. That's part of why I'm here." "Here in my shop? Or here on Earth?" Another long pause. "Both." Marcus waited, but she didn't elaborate. "You know, if you ever want to talk about whatever it is you're running from, I'm a good listener. And I don't judge." Zara looked at him with those striking violet eyes, and for a moment he thought she might open up. Then she shook her head. "It's complicated," she said. "Most things worth talking about are. This is more complicated than you can imagine." She gathered her jacket and headed for the door. "I'll see you tomorrow, Marcus. And thank you." "For what?" "For treating me like a person instead of a problem to be solved." After she left, Marcus stood in his empty shop thinking about that last comment. It suggested that most people in Zara's life saw her as a problem rather than a person. That was a heavy burden for anyone to carry, especially someone who couldn't be much older than 25. He was locking up when his phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made him stop in his tracks. "Alien Trade Summit postponed indefinitely amid political crisis." Marcus didn't usually pay much attention to interstellar politics, but something about the timing made him click on the article. According to the report, the Zalvani Empire's heir apparent had disappeared 3 days ago under mysterious circumstances, throwing the upcoming trade negotiations with Earth into chaos. The article included a photo of the missing heir, and Marcus felt his blood run cold. Even though the image was clearly formal and official, showing someone in elaborate ceremonial dress with intricate facial markings, the bone structure and those distinctive violet eyes were unmistakable. His mysterious customer wasn't just running from her problems, she was running from an entire empire. Marcus stood on the sidewalk outside his shop, staring at the photo on his phone, trying to process what this meant. Zara wasn't just some wealthy young woman with family issues. She was alien royalty who had somehow ended up in his repair shop, asking him to teach her how to fix things. The question was, what was she really trying to fix? And what would happen when her family came looking for her? As if summoned by his thoughts, Marcus noticed a sleek black hover car parked across the street that hadn't been there when Zara left. Its windows were tinted so dark he couldn't see inside, but something about it made his skin crawl. He walked to his apartment with the uncomfortable feeling that he was being watched, and that his simple life of fixing broken machines was about to become much more complicated. That night, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about purple eyes and alien empires, and the young woman who had asked him if he thought people could be fixed. Tomorrow, he would have to decide whether to confront her with what he knew, or pretend he still believed she was just another customer. Either way, he was beginning to understand that this repair job was going to test everything he believed about fixing things and helping people. And for the first time in his life, Marcus wasn't sure he was up to the challenge. Marcus arrived at his shop the next morning to find Zara already waiting outside, but she wasn't alone. 3 figures in dark suits stood nearby, their attention focused on her with the intensity of predators watching prey. Even from a distance, Marcus could tell they weren't human. Something about the way they moved, too fluid and controlled, suggested they were Zalvani. Zara saw him coming and her face went pale. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, a warning for him to stay away. But Marcus had never been good at taking the easy path when someone needed help. "Morning, Zara," he called out loudly, making sure the suited figures heard him. "Ready to get back to work on that bike?" The 3 aliens turned toward him in perfect unison, and Marcus got his first good look at alien faces. They were humanoid, but clearly not human, with slightly elongated features and skin that had a faint silvery undertone. Their eyes were the same violet as Zara's, but cold and emotionless. "Human," one of them said, his voice carrying an accent much stronger than Zara's. "You will step away from the princess. She is coming with us." "Princess?" Marcus looked at Zara with exaggerated surprise. "You didn't mention you were a princess. That's pretty cool." Zara's eyes widened at his casual response, but Marcus could see relief there too. He wasn't running. He wasn't calling the authorities. He was treating this like just another morning in the repair shop. "This is not a matter for humor, human," the lead alien said, taking a step forward. "The princess has duties to her people. She cannot waste time with your primitive machines." "Primitive?" Marcus raised an eyebrow and pulled out his keys. "You know, I've never met anyone who called my work primitive who could actually do it themselves. You want to come in and show me how it's done?" The alien's expression darkened. "You dare to challenge us?" "I'm not challenging anyone. I'm offering to teach you something. Same thing I offered Zara." Marcus opened his shop door and gestured inside. "Why don't we all go in and discuss this like civilized people?" "I'll put on some coffee." The aliens looked at each other uncertainly. Clearly they had expected either fear or defiance, not an invitation to coffee and conversation. Zara spoke up for the first time. "Kelvex, I told you I wasn't ready to come back. I need more time." "Your father grows impatient, Princess. The trade summit cannot proceed without you, and our people suffer while we wait." "5 more days," Zara said. "I just need 5 more days." "Impossible. We leave now." Marcus stepped between them, his hands raised peacefully. "Look, I don't know anything about galactic politics or trade summits, but I do know that when someone's not ready for something important, rushing them usually makes things worse." "You understand nothing, human," Kelvex snarled. "The fate of billions hangs in the balance." "Then maybe we should figure out why she's not ready instead of just dragging her away," Marcus said calmly. "Zara, what's really going on here?" Zara looked back and forth between Marcus and the aliens, clearly torn. Finally, she took a deep breath. "The trade summit isn't just about commerce," she said. "It's about survival. Our empire is dying, Marcus. Our worlds are overcrowded, our resources are depleted, and our people are losing hope. Earth represents our best chance for a new beginning." "Okay," Marcus said. "That sounds important. So why aren't you at the summit?" "Because I don't know how to fix it," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm supposed to be a leader, but I've never actually helped anyone. I've never solved a real problem. I've just been decorative." "A symbol." One of the other aliens, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "The princess has been sheltered her entire life. She has never been permitted to engage in manual labor or practical problem-solving." Kelvex shot him a sharp look. Zeelan! It is the truth, Commander, and perhaps the human should understand what he has unknowingly become part of. Marcus looked at Zara with new understanding. You came here to learn how to fix things because you need to know how to fix your empire. I thought if I could understand how humans approach problems, how you make broken things work again. Zara's voice trailed off. But I've only been here 3 days, and already they've found me. 3 days is long enough to learn something, Marcus said firmly. What have you learned? Zara considered this. That fixing things takes patience. That you have to understand the whole system before you change any part of it. That sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. Anything else? That helping people isn't about having power over them. It's about giving them what they need to help themselves. Marcus smiled. Sounds like you learned a lot. What does that tell you about your trade summit? Zara's eyes widened as understanding dawned. We've been approaching it all wrong. We've been negotiating like we're begging for charity, like Earth is doing us a favor by trading with us. But that's not how partnerships work. Go on. Earth needs what we can offer just as much as we need what Earth has. We have technologies, knowledge, cultural perspectives that could benefit everyone. It shouldn't be about one side giving and the other taking. Kelvex stepped forward. Princess, you speak of theories. The reality is that we are desperate, and desperation weakens any negotiating position. No, Zara said, her voice growing stronger. Desperation is what happens when you think there's only one solution to a problem. Marcus, show them Mrs. Patterson's food processor. Marcus blinked, confused by the sudden change of subject. But he led them to his workbench, where the disassembled food processor lay in carefully organized pieces. This machine was completely broken, Zara explained to the aliens. Most people would have thrown it away. But Marcus found a way to fix it by understanding what it really needed to do and finding new ways to make that happen. She turned to Marcus. Show them the gear you designed. Marcus pulled up the 3D model on his computer. The original gear was made from stamped metal, but that was just because it was cheap to manufacture in bulk. For a one-off replacement, I could use a stronger polymer that would actually last longer than the original. You improved the design while fixing it, Zara said. That's what we need to do with the trade summit. Instead of just trying to restore the old agreements, we need to create something better. Zeelan leaned forward to examine the 3D model. Ingenious. You increased the efficiency while reducing the complexity of manufacture. It's not that complicated, Marcus said. You just have to be willing to think outside the box and not get attached to the way things have always been done. Kelvex was studying Zara with a new expression. You believe this approach could work with the trade negotiations? I think it's the only approach that will work, Zara said firmly, but I need Marcus's help. What? Marcus looked at her in surprise. I don't know anything about interstellar politics. You know about fixing things. You know about finding solutions that work for everyone involved. You know about treating people like people instead of problems to be solved. Zara turned to face him fully. Marcus, I want you to come to the summit as my advisor. That's impossible, Kelvex protested. Humans are not permitted in the Imperial Palace. Then we'll hold the summit somewhere else, Zara said. Somewhere neutral, somewhere that reminds everyone that we're trying to build something new, not just patch up something old. Marcus felt like the conversation had gotten completely away from him. Zara, I appreciate the offer, but I'm just a repair shop owner. I'm not qualified to advise alien royalty. You're exactly what I need, she insisted. Someone who sees problems as puzzles to be solved instead of battles to be won. Someone who believes that anything can be fixed if you care enough to find the right approach. She looked around the shop, taking in the organized chaos of parts and tools and half-finished projects. This place represents everything I want our partnership with Earth to be. Practical, honest, focused on making things work rather than making things look good. Marcus followed her gaze, seeing his humble shop through alien eyes. It wasn't much to look at. But every machine here had been given a second chance. Every broken thing had been treated as worthy of repair. "If I agree to this," he said slowly, "what happens to my shop?" "We'll find someone to run it while you're gone," Zara said quickly. "Or we could relocate the summit here." "Here?" Kelvex looked appalled. "This place is hardly suitable for imperial negotiations." "Actually," Zelan said thoughtfully, "there is precedent. The Treaty of Rigel was negotiated in a mining station cafeteria. Sometimes informal settings produce better results." Marcus looked at each of them in turn, trying to process what was being asked of him. 3 days ago, his biggest concern had been whether he could afford to keep the shop's rent paid. Now he was being asked to help negotiate the future of human-alien relations. "Mrs. I. Patterson's food processor," he said finally. "What?" Zara looked confused. "You said you wanted to learn how to fix things. Mrs. Patterson's food processor is going to take us 5 more days to complete. If you're serious about learning to see problems through to completion, then we finish that first." Kelvex started to protest, but Zara held up a hand to silence him. "You're right," she said. "We made a commitment to Mrs. Patterson. We follow through on that commitment." "And after that?" "After that, we fix an empire." Marcus considered this for a long moment. It was completely insane. He was completely unqualified. It would probably end in disaster. On the other hand, it was the biggest repair job anyone had ever offered him. "All right," he said, "but I have conditions. First, we do this my way. That means no rushing, no shortcuts, and no throwing money at problems until we understand what we're really trying to fix." Agreed. Second, everyone involved gets treated with respect, human and alien alike. No one's opinion gets dismissed just because they're not important enough or powerful enough. Agreed. Third, we focus on building something that works for everyone, not just fixing what's broken. Zara smiled, and Marcus was struck again by how it transformed her entire face. Agreed. Anything else? Marcus looked around his shop one more time, at the familiar tools and the comfortable chaos of his life's work. "Yeah. When this is all over, I want to come home. This is where I belong." "I wouldn't dream of taking you away from here permanently," Zara said. "After all, you still have to teach me how to rebuild that motor housing." Over the next 5 days, Marcus's small repair shop became the unlikely center of the most important diplomatic preparation in human history. Zara and her guards took up residence in a nearby hotel, but they spent most of their time in the shop, watching Marcus work and learning about his approach to problem-solving. Mrs. Patterson's food processor became a case study in diplomatic methodology. Every step of the repair process was analyzed and discussed in terms of how it might apply to interstellar relations. The careful diagnosis phase became a lesson in understanding all stakeholders' needs. The design improvement process became an exercise in finding win-win solutions. When Mrs. Patterson came to pick up her repaired food processor, she found herself unexpectedly surrounded by alien dignitaries eager to hear her opinion on the repair quality. She took it all in stride, inviting everyone over for soup the next day to test whether the machine worked properly. "The soup tastes exactly right," she told them as they crowded into her small kitchen, aliens and humans alike slurping homemade vegetable soup. "But even better, I feel like Harold would be proud of what we did with his gift. We didn't just fix it, we made it better." Zara caught Marcus's eye across the table and smiled. They had found their diplomatic model. The trade summit was held 2 weeks later in Marcus's repair shop, which had been carefully cleaned but not otherwise changed. Representatives from Earth and the Zalvani Empire sat around Marcus's workbench, using his tools as props to illustrate points about resource sharing and technological exchange. Instead of a formal treaty, they created what Marcus called a diagnostic manual, a framework for identifying problems and developing solutions together. Instead of rigid trade quotas, they established maintenance schedules, regular check-ins to ensure the partnership was working for everyone involved. The agreement they reached was unlike any diplomatic document in galactic history. It was practical, flexible, and focused on continuous improvement rather than static terms. Most importantly, it was built on the radical notion that broken things could always be made better if the right people cared enough to put in the work. 6 months later, Marcus was back in his shop, elbow-deep in a hovercar engine, when Zara walked through his door. She was dressed in simple work clothes, her hair tied back in a practical ponytail, and her hands showed the calluses of someone who had been working with tools. "How's the Empire?" Marcus asked, without looking up from his work. "Fixed," she said with satisfaction. "Mostly. We're implementing some of your suggestions about decentralized problem-solving and local initiative. Turns out there are a lot of people throughout the Empire who are really good at fixing things once you give them permission to try." "And how are you?" "Learning. I've set up a repair cooperative on my homeworld, teaching people to fix things instead of replacing them. It's amazing how much hope you can generate just by showing people that broken doesn't mean worthless." Marcus straightened up and wiped his hands on his rag. "So what brings you back to Earth?" Zara grinned. "I need help with a really big repair job. Apparently there's an entire solar system with some serious infrastructure problems, and they specifically requested the human who fixed Mrs. Patterson's food processor." Marcus looked out at the street, where he could see a familiar black hovercar parked outside. But this time, instead of looking threatening, it looked like a ride to adventure. "How long will it take?" he asked. "Hard to say. Maybe a few years. Could be longer if we decide to really do it right." Marcus considered this. His shop would be in good hands with the assistant he'd hired. Mrs. Patterson had volunteered to check on the place regularly, and there were worse fates than becoming the galaxy's go-to expert on fixing broken things. "All right," he said, reaching for his toolkit, "but we do this properly. No shortcuts, no rushing, and if we're going to fix a solar system, we're going to make it better than it was before." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Zara said. "After all, you taught me that the best repairs don't just fix the problem. They prevent it from happening again." As they walked out of the shop together, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since a mysterious young woman had walked through his door with a broken bike. He had thought he was just fixing a machine, but it turned out he had been fixing the future. The sign on his door still read, "Chen's Repairs, we fix what others call impossible." But now it carried a new weight. It had become a promise not just to his neighborhood customers, but to civilizations across the galaxy. And Marcus Chen, the human who had helped an alien heiress in disguise, discovered that sometimes the best way to fix your own fate was to help others fix theirs.